Many of you are familiar with two important catchphrases. One that during the Bush administration was the slogan for the way education should take place, and that is no child left behind. And the other, everyone's a winner. Everyone is excellent. Everyone deserves an equal amount of praise. Everyone is valuable. All of these come out of the spirit of our democratic era. And Nietzsche believes that this democratic spirit comes out of a fundamental error about what humans are and the way they exist in relation to each other, in comparison to one another. He calls this the democratic prejudice. Now, what is a prejudice? A prejudice is a prejudgment, right? A judgment made before all the facts are in, without a good reason. And he's going to argue that the first myth that our basic moral outlook is based upon is this idea that humans are essentially the same. Now, we have the same basic essence, and it is this essence which grounds our equal treatment of one another. And so thus, if humans are basically the same, then all humans are of equal value, right? You see how that follows? Pretty thing. Because their basic nature, what makes them human, is the same. That's the ground for their value as humans. And so therefore, all of them are going to have equal value. And this then forms the basis for international law and for our Constitution, that all humans are created equally, right? And therefore have an equal right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You see how this forms the basis for our democratic system? And so therefore, if this is true, that humans are basically the same, have the same basic capacities, the same basic value, then there shouldn't be a hierarchical society. There shouldn't be a caste system. There shouldn't be the nobles and the peasants. That's based on an error, and therefore the only legitimate form of power should be democratic in its structure. Only liberal democracy is the legitimate form of government. And this forms the basis for many of our presuppositions as a society, doesn't it? And really not just our society, but European society and the West in general. And the West has influenced the rest of the world in this respect. We fight for human rights, don't we? And of course, all of this is based on this idea that we are all basically, essentially the same. But Nietzsche says this is a falsehood. Not only is it a falsehood, but it's a blind falsehood. It doesn't pay attention to the facts on the ground, does it? Think about this. If we're going to say that humans are of equal value, then there must be something that every human shares in common to an equal degree. Because when I use the word equality, it's a measure term, isn't it? I could say greater than or equal to in value, or I could say less than. All of them assume amounts of something that everyone who is human shares in common. So let me ask you a question. What is that? What is the one thing that all humans share in common, that they share to an equal degree, and that therefore can form the basis for this measurement, this value measurement, so that we could say it's not a prejudice, but a conclusion drawn from a rational consideration of the facts on the ground. Now, in the old Christian, Judeo-Christian and Muslim view, it's an easy answer to that, right? Thomas Jefferson, when he wrote the Declaration of Independence, when he says that all humans are created equally, he is assuming the Christian God, the Judeo-Christian God, the God of Abraham. And in this God's creation of humanity, he creates every human in his image, doesn't he? And so since every human is created equally by God, with an equal amount of his image, then it follows that we all have equal value. But do we believe in this God anymore? Does that form the basis for our state? Some may believe so, but we know that's not the case because we have separation of church and state, which means you could believe anything you want and still be a good citizen as far as what the basis for that value is. But now we have a problem. What then natural quality do humans share in common that then forms the basis for their equality? Is it their rationality? Remember Aristotle and Kant, who you will learn a little bit about in the future lecture, all believe it's our human rationality that gives us our moral standards and gives us our value. It's because we are rational beings that we have that moral value above the value of animals and plants and so forth. But rationality is a property of degree, isn't it? Aren't some people more rational than others? If that follows, then it follows that if rationality is the basis, then humans are not equal. Well, others believe, like John Stuart Mill and Epicurus and others, that it's our ability to feel pleasure and pain that gives us our equal value. Everyone is chasing after happiness. Everyone is going away from pain. And since we all have this common pursuit, then therefore this ability to feel pleasure and pain, we're sentient beings, then it would follow that humans are equal. But we have a big problem there. Not everyone has an equal ability to feel pleasure and pain. Isn't that true? So again, that wouldn't form the basis for equality. We see that, for example, lobsters feel some pain, but not to the degree that would make it cruel to boil them. Humans have a greater ability than lobsters, but among humans there are degrees of that, aren't there? Well, aren't we equally free? Well, Nietzsche's going to argue that we're not free, but let's assume that we are. That's an ability to make decisions through reason. And without reason and knowledge, you cannot have voluntary or free action, as we already saw. So, children possess free will to a lesser degree than adults, right? And really old adults who are on stages of dementia and senility have that ability way less than a full-grown adult. And among adults, there are different levels of rational maturity, which means there are different degrees of autonomy or free will. So therefore, it would follow that if that's the basis for our equality, then we're not equal. Nietzsche challenges us. He says, find one quality that humans all possess to the same degree. And he knows you won't be able to find it, will you? So if there's no natural quality that forms the basis for human equality, then humans are not the same. They don't possess the same amount of anything, and therefore it follows that they're not essentially the same, because it's those qualities that define their very existence. And so what we have here is a prejudice, don't we? A prejudice that we hold on to because it comforts us. In what way does it comfort us? Well, it comforts our laziness. When we see someone who's way better at the guitar than we are, we've been practicing our whole lives, and they pick it up the first day and start playing, don't we hate them? When we've been studying for a test 10 hours and a person didn't study at all, and I get a 70 after studying for 10 hours, and they get 100 without studying at all, don't I hate them? So jealousy is the root of it, isn't it? It's that we have those who cannot do as well in the things they value than others. And so we want to put them to our level. This is what Nietzsche talks about in his chapter on the tarantulas in Thus Spake Zarathustra, is that human greatness requires that there's inequality, that all greatness comes from a basic inequality among humans. Think of all the advances in human existence that we treasure. Medical science is a great one and very relevant to this course. How is that possible? It's only possible with a lot of money. with a great modern infrastructure of science and research, which requires a great amount of prosperity, and therefore it could have only occurred in very rich and developed countries. Which countries are those? The countries of the West, right? Well, think of the United States, where most of this research takes place, where most of the advances take place. North America. North America concentrates 64% of the world's resources among 16% of the world's population. Say we were to take and distribute that all out so that everyone got the same amount in accordance with this equality, then these great advances would have been impossible. Greatness comes on the back of inequality. That's why a temple has stairs that scale the heights, and that assumes lower and higher. How do we make things equal? Well, here's a way. It's called communism. It's called equaling it out. But how do I do that? Well, I can only do it by going to the lowest common denominator. When I was in the Army, we used to run in formation. To run in formation assumes one thing, that everyone's running at the same pace for a certain amount of distance, say 5 miles. Are we going to run at the fastest pace? No, because pretty soon the slower ones will fall out. Are we going to run at the medium pace? No, because then the faster ones will go faster and the slower ones will fall out. So if you're going to guarantee that everyone runs at the same pace, that no child is left behind, then what pace do you have to run at? You have to run at the slowest pace, don't you? And therefore, if we're going to force equality onto society, so that everyone is treated equally, so that everyone has equal value, then we have to go at the lowest pace, don't we? We have to go at the lowest common denominator. This is the logic of democracy. This is the logic of the prejudice that humans are basically the same. It squashes human greatness. It's jealous of greatness, and because it's jealous, it clothes itself in the cloaks of justice by saying equality, equality, when in fact equality is injustice when we understand that not everyone's the same, that there are those who are capable of more, and by squashing them to the lowest common denominator, we squash the striving of life to greater levels, because we only allow those levels that are within the reach of everybody. Thus, the democratic prejudice is a prejudice. It's not based on reality, and it's a bad one at that. It destroys the quest for greatness, and we see that that's the element of life that makes life life. It's the will to power. It's the striving to overcome humanity, to go beyond it for what he calls the Übermensch.